Hello and welcome to Black, Brown, and Bilingue, where our mission is to unite the Black and Brown communities through education, storytelling, and community engagement.
The vision of Black, Brown, and Bilingue is to be part of creating a world in which Black and Brown identities are affirmed, bilingualism and biculturalism are nurtured, and equity is the driving force behind all that we do. Thank you for joining us again today. I am Lisette Jacobson, and I am one of your hosts.
And I'm Maurice McDavid. I'm your other host.
Hello and welcome into another episode of Black, Brown, and Bilingue. Today we have some repeat guests, but folk that we are super excited to talk to again. We have with us, of course, Dr. James Cohen and Dr. Joe Flynn. Both are professors at NIU, Northern Illinois University, which now we can both say is our alma mater. Lisette's been there. She stayed true to NIU all the way through, and I joined in the master's program, and we're both back in the EDS. We're so excited to have these two gentlemen here with us, and to get started with a conversation about their NIU social justice camp, which again we both have attended. Welcome in today, Dr. Cohen and Dr. Flynn.
Thank you for having us.
Thanks a lot.
Absolutely. Thank you for joining us. So, okay, we got NIU Social Justice Camp, perhaps the place that we start for our listeners who are listening from around the world or perhaps are not familiar with this. Can you just start off by telling us a little bit about this social justice camp, right? This is a whole camp dedicated to social justice.
Yeah, the Social Justice Summer Camp going into its 5th year this June is a professional development experience that we created where we are bringing teachers to the campus of Northern Illinois University and having a somewhat full-blown camp experience. I mean, nobody's out sleeping in tents. However, we have our participants come, they arrive on a Monday during the day and stick with us till Thursday. And every day we have keynote addresses, plenary sessions, breakout sessions, and an evening film series. And this arrangement allows something really important to happen when discussing social justice and diversity, equity, and inclusion issues in education. And that is, it allows the luxury of time. Oftentimes when teachers are receiving professional development around oftentimes complex issues, they really don't have the time to decompress and consider the ideas and share their thoughts with their colleagues and really work through an idea. Usually, a PD session for teachers happens after school for an hour and a half, or maybe during a school improvement day or something like that. But that, even in those arrangements, it doesn't really give people the time to really sit with ideas and know that there's somebody around who can answer a question at a moment's notice or anything like that. And we've come to find that it's a really invigorating and deeply moving experience, having that ability to dive deeply into a wide range of issues while also having the opportunity to network with other professionals who are interested in this kind of work, as well as learn a little bit about NIU and the programs that we provide as a college of education and other structured professional development opportunities that educators can have to them. But we think that what we're doing is really, really important. And we feel fundamentally that at the end of the day, the more that people have the opportunity to talk through these ideas, the more comfortable they can become with them, and the more deeply they can think about and collaborate with others on how to implement ideas and how to be reflective of ideas.
And the beautiful thing about it is also, just to piggyback on what Joe is saying, there's time scheduled in the day where the participants, or the campers, we call them, we're the counselors, they're the campers. We try to go with the theme.
I was a camper, eh?
Yeah. And so you'll see a lot of campers sitting around discussing.
Mm-hmm.
And when you go up or walk by them or walk near them, or you stop and listen, they're not talking about what's going on at, outside. They're talking about the topic or the theme or the idea, the content that they just left a workshop from,
Mm-hmm.
a presentation from. They're talking about these issues, and they're delving deeply into them so that they gain a deeper understanding of these issues.
Mm-hmm.
Like Joe was saying, it's so important that it's not a sit and get, right?
Mm-hmm.
That Freudian banking model where the person stands up in front of the room, gives you all this content knowledge, and you're supposed to just like open up your head and allow them to deposit it into it. And then after you leave, once the guy or gal leaves, then you close it and then you move on. It's not like that. You actually have opportunity to sit around and discuss with your colleagues. And then of course, at the end of the 3-day conference or camp, we say, now what? And we provide several hours for the campers to sit in groups from their, the idea is to send for an administrator and several teachers from one school building to go as a team.
Mm-hmm.
And so that on the third day of the camp, we have all these guiding questions, and we have them sit in their teams, and they discuss, all right, now what? What do we want to do with all this new information that we just learned? Where do we want to go from here? And I think that is something also that you don't get at a typical conference. You don't get that individualized attention. You're not getting that now what phase in the learning process, mm-hmm. or in the internalization process. Mm-hmm. So I think, we've tweaked the conference over the years, and, with the schedule and things, but I think we've hit a really good schedule now.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
That's one of the things that I wanted to ask about, because I was reflecting on when I attended. I was still a classroom teacher. And right now I am a building principal. So I'm trying to think back to, was this around the time when the camp started? Was this around the time that Trump was running for president? I can't quite remember anymore. But it was definitely pre-George Floyd, but I don't know if it was during Trump running for office and he had made some statements. Like, what was the impetus for the camp? And, after, post-George Floyd, how has it evolved? Has that had any influence on the way that you organize the camp, or even the sessions that you provide?
That's a great question. I believe if I'm getting older, so my dates often fail me, but I believe the first camp was in the summer of 2017. Mm-hmm. So it was the first year of the Trump administration. Okay. So although I'm not going to be cheeky that way, I'll just say that Donald Trump had absolutely nothing to do with the creation of this camp. It wasn't. I mean, he really, literally wasn't on the radar. It wasn't about that at all, because these issues predate and will probably last much longer than Mr. Trump is around, in whatever capacity that might be. So the idea for the camp actually originated in an attempt to come up with something that kind of allowed interdisciplinary teams of teachers, particularly middle school teachers, and teams of 4, which include math, science, social studies, and language arts, to bring teams of 4 to campus. Initially, it was for a day. In the first half of the day, we talk about social justice issues. In the second half of the day, we talk about interdisciplinary teaching practices. And that kind of blossomed. I started the process and went to our department chair at the time, and I had then, after getting the clearance from her to proceed, I then reached out to Dr. Cohen and Dr. Michael Mandarino, the third of our three-headed monster. And Dr. Mandarino was formerly at NIU. He was one of our colleagues, but he left to go be the director of curriculum at Layton Public Schools over in the near west suburbs of Chicago. And hooking up with those two guys expanded our range of ideas. And one of the first things we realized was a day is not going to be long enough. It's just not going to be enough time. So the next thing you know, we went from a day to a 4-day experience, and never looked back.
So Dr. Cohen, can you maybe speak to also of like how it has evolved? How have the sessions changed, or just what are some of the changes that you guys have implemented?
Well, COVID really changed a lot.
Sure.
Right. So for the first 3 years, we had breakout sessions. We'd have the plenary in the morning. We'd have breakout sessions in the afternoon, or in the latter morning and early afternoon. And then we'd have, after dinner, we would have a keynote and then a film series at night. And the film series, like each one of us, Mike, Joe, and I, would show, we're all interested in different things regarding multicultural ed or social justice. Like my area is undocumented immigration, and Mike's is about literacy, critical literacy. Joe is hip hop and Black history and the Black experience in the United States. So we would always show videos respective of each other's interests. So people would have the opportunity to go to each one. Now what we're doing is, so for the first 3 years, that's how we did it. For the last 2 years, the first year we had a podcast series, and because COVID was full blown that summer, so we couldn't do any. It was the first summer of COVID. And then last summer we did a film series where each of us did a different respective video, and they were to watch it beforehand, and then they get online with us and we unpack it for like an hour and a half. And it was really nice. I mean, the discussions were just fruitful, beautiful, in depth and thoughtful. This summer, we're changing the schedule a little bit. The film series, the keynotes are going to be before dinner, and that is going to allow us to have the film series a little bit earlier. Because starting a movie at 8:30, finishing at 10, having the discussion go for an hour. So you're looking at 11, and then my brain shuts off at around 11:30 or so. I'm not like Mike and Joe who could go to 2 o'clock in the morning. I need my beauty sleep. And obviously I need a lot of it. So the idea is to make the nights a little bit earlier, because we're waking, everyone starts breakfast at 7 a.m. and, we just start moving right away with our first plenary. Like each one of us does a plenary in the morning. Now this, something else different this summer that we're doing is we've invited Dana Isawi, who is a counseling professor. And she wrote her dissertation on refugees, on Palestinian refugees. And so she's just a remarkable human being, super bright, just wonderful personality. And we're very excited to welcome her aboard as our 4th counselor. So she and I will be just doing one of the plenaries in the morning together, a combined plenary. I think maybe the second day of the camp. I'm going to have to leave early the camp this summer because I'm going to Indonesia for 3 weeks. So, but that's another story.
When am I going to get to go to Indonesia? Come on now.
Right. So you all have talked a little bit about its origin, some of the changes you're making for this year. I guess part of what I'm wondering is where do you see the camp in a few years from now, right? Where would you like to see it get to and grow to? I know, already we've seen some growth in the camp in the year that I was there. Rooms were full. And I think had COVID not interrupted, we'd be talking about hosting 2 or 3 camps in a summer because, it was growing in that direction. So can you talk a little bit about where you'd like to see the camp kind of grow to?
We want to limit it at 150. One of the concerns is if it gets beyond the 150, it loses its
Intimacy.
And so we really want to keep it at a limited capacity of 150.
Yeah, and in addition to that, one of the things about the camp is, we're counselors. So if you think back to, the old school summer camp, the counselors were always around, there to assist the campers and help mentor campers, as well as design the daily schedule and lead activities and so on and so forth. So we're always walking around and available to people if they have questions or if they have an idea or if, something was said in the previous session that's just, really itching at their insides to get out. So, keeping the camp at a maximum of 150 gives us the space to be able to sustain, that kind of relationship with our participants, as opposed to, say, allowing the camp to grow to 300 people, which on one hand fiscally would be amazing, right? More the merrier. But I think, once you start getting upwards 200 people, now you're just becoming, your typical conference, and all of the accoutrements of this summer camp experience is now replaced with something different.
So, I'm going to switch gears a little bit here because Maurice and I function as building principals. And again, when we were the campers, we were still, I think, teaching. As Maurice and I have continued to grow as leaders, we have noticed that oftentimes when, social justice conversations come up, we're often looked to or asked about and kind of having to be that spokesperson. Are you inviting more leaders? Are you seeing an increase in district level leaders attending summer camp? And, have you continued relationships with separate districts to carry this work on beyond summer?
Before COVID hit,
Mm-hmm.
that was the intention.
Mm-hmm.
We actually had planned with one school district to do I think it was 2.5, it was 3.5, or it was going to be summer camp 2.5 or summer camp 3.5, something like that. And we were going to go to that district in the winter time, sometime during winter, and get together with the campers who attended over the summer and say, okay, how are things going? What can we do? And work with them again. Administrators are absolutely welcome. In fact, in most districts, they are sending administrators. So we're actually very excited about that. And because it's the team concept, that they come in a team, administrators we've had superintendents. In fact, DeKalb superintendent, I believe, is coming this summer. And many of her administrative team will be coming this summer. They're sending 45 people. So, this is it's it's an all-inclusive, not just for educators, but we're also actually adding a counseling strand for school counselors, because we're realizing that with this day and age where there's so much trauma, the kids are experiencing so much trauma, and whether it's from society as a whole, filling the kids with anxiety and stress, or from school, or from whatever area, teachers and administrators and counselors really need to be more updated on how to respond and how to interact and engage kids from this trauma-informed care, and trauma-informed teaching. So we have now we're creating a strand specifically for school counselors. And, of course, teachers and administrators and anybody else who wants to attend those strands are allowed to. We're not like saying it's only for counselors. But we've already put on the slate to invite all these different counselors to talk about various aspects of how to work, how to respond, and how to engage kids from a more socio-emotional level and trauma-informed care level. So we're expanding our understandings. Like, we were going to be doing a community college strand the last time. I'm not sure if we're going to be able to do that this summer, but that might be, I don't think we've taken it off the table.
Yeah, I know that our superintendent had talked about wanting to take a group from West Chicago. Yeah. Although, here's the thing, we get out a little later. So our last days are a little, camp would be over. So just putting that little plug in there, like if you want to recruit some districts in DuPage County, because we'd be extremely interested in that. But I think that there were some conflicts in terms of dates.
Scheduling is always somewhat of a challenge. We tried to keep it consistent, but we're trying to navigate this this break between the end of our semester, the end of K-12 schools on the average, and the beginning of the next semester, because some of our participants, of course, are going to be enrolled in summer courses at NIU or other colleges and universities in the area. So we have to find these spaces that we could consider breaks in the normal schedule. So that's the primary motivator for why it's scheduled when it is.
So it sounds like a West Chicago problem, not a social. I'm just kidding.
Well, no.
Yeah, right.
So I wanted to jump in here with a question. I think, when we think about the work that you all are doing with this camp, and we also think about some of the difficulties that education has faced over the last 2 years, I've gotta ask, with this anti-racist, which is interesting, because if you're going to be anti-racist, I don't know that people understand that you're saying I am racist, but with this critical race theory, by definition, with this critical race theory attack, some of these different pieces, has that shown up yet in some of the work that you all are doing, in terms of either pushback or you all being intentional about, kind of jumping out in front of it, right? And I bring this up because, Dr. Flynn, you did some work with DeKalb ROE, and my wife works for them, and then my wife's going to be, as a school board member for DeKalb, is going to be attending the camp this summer. And I know that it's conversations that have shown up at school board meetings. Can you all just, expound on that a little bit? Some of the anti-racist work that you're doing.
Well, thank you for that question. It's obviously it's a timely and important question. I personally, in the work that I've gone out and done, haven't received any serious backlash. Now that could very well be the case that people are just being polite and don't want to get into it. I'm not going to say that that's that explanation is off the table. But with that being said, the participants that I've worked with in professional development have at least listened and been open to hearing about what critical race theory is, specifically in this context. But with that being said, I'm also try to approach the conversation about critical race theory sans politics, which is kind of a strange thing to say, because critical race theory by its very nature is a highly political program, right? It's a very political idea. It's a bold political statement to stand flat-footed and say, one of the assumptions that we make as a tradition of researchers, scholars, analysts, et cetera, is that racism is real and ingrained into American institutions and society. You know, that's a bold political statement. But with that being said, I also think that when you first and foremost define what critical race theory is and help people understand where critical race theory came from, you know, what were the ideas or the questions that folks like Derek Bell and others were grappling with in the late 1970s, early 1980s, critical race theory becomes a little less scary. And then furthermore, when you start explaining what the theoretical and methodological approaches are in critical race theory, it's like, oh, is that what they're doing? And, you know, then taking people through a few examples of what critical race theory scholarship looks like, you know, or what are some of the ideas that critical race theorists have put forward. You know, I was working with actually a corporate group earlier this week. And it was really interesting because as I began to really explain and dive into, you know, ideas like intersectionality and interest convergence and counter story, there seemed to me to be oh, this is what it is, you know, like, well, okay, it makes sense to ask a question like that, right? You know, and then if you like get really deep into it and start, you know, quoting statistics about, you know, incarceration rates and, you know, who's on probation and who's on probation longer, and, you know, all of these other objective challenges with law and criminal justice, you know, some of these questions become much more clear. And, you know, I think you can even argue it necessitates asking the question, if we've made all of these law and policy changes over centuries, then why do these disparities continue to exist, is essentially the question of critical race theorists. And you have to think about and talk about race and how race works in our lives in order to answer those questions. So what we try to do as professional developers, is that the term, James? Yeah. So what we do as professional developers is we try to demystify the topic and remove it from the political considerations to help people understand, first and foremost, what is this phenomenon? Why? And then once people understand what it is, then we can talk about how it's become politically manipulated and what are the implications of that, right? I think it's important for people who aren't, especially those of us who aren't steeped in academia and surrounded by this all the time, recognize that there are an infinite number of what we call conceptual frameworks to analyze virtually anything, right? And some of them are more controversial than others. And critical race theory is another conceptual framework to use to analyze a situation or a problem. But I always say that if you don't look for some things, then you're not going to see them. Right. So if you don't want to look for race and how racism has an impact, then you're not going to see it. But as soon as you put that lens on, you're going to see it. And that's how, you know, these larger ideas around oppression happen to work. The less they get talked about, the more powerful they are. the more they're talked about, the more contested they are.
Yeah, wow. So, I love the way, and I appreciate the way you just explained that. And, how you said you want to demystify this, because it has just become such an emotionally charged topic that to be able to speak to it objectively with statistical data to support that is I think it's a nice approach. That's something that I fully acknowledge that I struggle with, to always, stay as objective and calm as possible. Maurice can speak to that. One of the things I often talk about is that male privilege piece, especially when you're the only woman in the room, or even if you are with other women in the room, and how Maurice and I can say the exact same thing and it'll be better received from Maurice. And it's still, okay, you know what? See what I mean? And I always tell him the ability to not have to speak to it, because there are moments where he will try to remain neutral. And I said, I don't have that luxury to remain neutral because this is directly impacting me. But, I think that is a really good point that you just made of like, hey, let's just talk about this objectively. Let's remove the politics from it. And I can definitely provide statistical data, Maurice, on how these things happen to women.
And by the way, you're not going to receive an argument from me that it's not happening, right? I think though one of the things that Lisette is talking to is what I hope is some of those outcomes of the camps, right? And that's kind of what's going to be maybe my last question for you today. But what I would hope would be one of the outcomes, and certainly was an outcome for me, right, is that challenge to not remain silent in those moments where, even if it's not necessarily impacting me, right, as a male in the room, to be able to still call out that injustice. So when you all think about, the camp that you're going to run this year, what are some of those outcomes that you're hopeful that folk are walking away from camp with this tool, or with this inspiration, or with this the ability to do such and such?
According to Christine Bennett, the second goal of multicultural ed is to the intracultural consciousness, understanding yourself as a cultural being. And I think that we provide so much time for the participants, the campers, to reflect and to internalize the content that that goal is, you can't understand others unless you understand yourself first, right? And that's what we're hoping, that at different levels, everyone who goes to the camp starts at a different place. And so those who are starting at the level where they're still understanding themselves as cultural beings, that process never ends, of course, but if they're at the very beginning of that process, we're hoping that they will leave with a better understanding of the issues at hand, but also of themselves as cultural beings, and how we as individuals position others and how others position us, right? Depending on the intersectionality of all of our identities. We're also hoping that the several of the other goals that Bennett talks about, and that's intercultural competence, anti-racist, anti-misogynistic education, global awareness. We're hoping that they understand these things as well. And like the sixth goal of Bennett is action, social action. And we're hoping that the participants will leave understanding that if they don't take action, no one else will, or very few other people will. And it really this is something I tell my students all the time. It's like, if you don't take action, if you don't advocate for your kids, no one else in your school is going to advocate for your kids and your kids' family. So you have to step up. And when half of my class is white women, they say, well, it's so exhausting. It's like, yeah, it's exhausting. For white people, it's very exhausting, but we have the option to step back and go home and not think about it. Black and brown folks, they don't have that option. It's literally a life or death situation for them. And so we as white folks don't have the option we do have the option, but we shouldn't have the option. And when, like people like Ted Cruz, not to say like an awful name, but
No object.
yeah, like when he talks about, well, they're trying to make us feel guilty. Like no one's trying to make you feel guilty. That's not the point of this. Guilt is not going to make us act. It's not going to do anything for us. It's just, we were born into this system. And now that our understanding of the system is at a place where we can make a difference, it's ethically and morally on us to make a difference. The metaphor I like to use is of a wheel, right? Like a bicycle tire. And we could either be a spoke supporting that wheel and the system of injustice that is continuing, or we could be a stick and we could either pop that tire or put the stick in the tire itself so that it stops moving. We have to do something, because the way that, the status quo, as Ibram Kendi is talking about, and critical race theory says, is inherently, foundationally racist. It's based on racism. All you have to do is look at our laws and the foundation of our laws. So if we are allowing the status quo to continue, then we are fundamentally being racist. So we have to always be thinking about how to be anti-racist, putting a stick into that wheel and either slowing it down or stopping it altogether or changing it somehow. And that's what my plan is. My goal, my hope is that the campers, when they finish participating in this camp at whatever level they are in their own process, they will be able to take action. Because without action, then the status quo is just going to continue.
Yeah, I appreciate all that, James, because, for me, I think one of the major goals of the camp has been to help people recognize that it's an unfolding dialogue, that the more comfortable and more understanding you get of this broad range of issues under the umbrella of social justice, the more you realize that you kind of have to keep engaged and keep conversating or dialoguing, keep advancing your own knowledge and understanding, and keep building your own networks of people, because it takes a lifetime to learn how to exist within a particular system, right? And it takes a lifetime to learn how to undo that system. So we want to dispel the notion that, well, if I just go to this camp and learn a few things, then everything will be okay. And it's like, no, that's not really how it is, right? It's an ongoing experience of learning, unlearning, relearning, and over and over and over and over again. And of course, sharing that with your colleagues in your community. Teachers are a very highly contested role in American society. Otherwise, you would not have all of these parents showing up at school board meetings protesting for various issues, whether that's critical race theory or school uniforms or free speech issues, et cetera, et cetera. So education in and of itself is highly political, and teachers are the foot soldiers that have to deal with all of that. And so it's not so much that I think that it's important that teachers be a certain way so much as it's important that teachers think about certain issues and ideas because they have a direct impact on their students' experiences. And there's far too much research and scholarship out there at this point that shows that when children are treated with respect, when they feel as though they have a place or a sense of belonging within a classroom, when their teachers have strong relationships or strong connections with their families, when that child's culture and backgrounds and ideals or values are held in common respect along with everyone else's, those children tend to do better in school. There's too much research to say that that's not true. So what I hope that people learn from the camp is not only a range of strategies, not only a foundational understanding of sometimes ideas that are complicated and complex, but that this is an ongoing project that is going to continue to unfold over time. And you know the people who have moved further down the field because they are far less frustrated or concerned with having that conversation and recognize for themselves that this is something that we're going to be working on for a long time.
It's definitely a journey, not a location, right?
Yeah.
It's the journey, not the destination. It's the process, not the product. That's what I've been trying to tell my teachers.
Right. Oh, that's so true.
It's so true. All right. Well, thank you so much. It has been so nice to reconnect with the two of you. I hope that we can continue to engage in these conversations and hopefully even have you on for more episodes, because I'm very curious, Dr. Flynn, what you were talking about with the whole idea of an accomplice. I definitely challenged me a little bit there, and I was like, okay.
Simple. I can answer it now.
Let's go. Come on.
Essentially, people have this idea that being an ally is the zenith of what particularly white people can be in this struggle against racial oppression. And no, it's not just being an ally. Allies have a lot of luxury and privileges that people that see themselves as accomplices against racial oppression don't. So an ally, if you don't want to show up and be there, you don't have to. You don't really have to risk your neck for anything if you're an ally. You can just stand on the sidelines and say, rah, rah, rah.
Or change your profile picture to Black Lives Matter. Sorry.
Yeah. And, it's somewhat performative, and, it can oftentimes be really surface. But I think when you make that move to being an accomplice, you understand something that's really deeply important, that we are all caught up in the system of oppression. And it is in all of our interest to dismantle that system. This isn't this isn't a zero-sum game. This is about the development of a more beloved society in which people do feel and know that they are free and open to become their best selves, right? That's what this is supposed to be about. So we try to encourage people to become accomplices in the struggle against racial oppression, as opposed to just an ally against a particular affinity group's history of oppression. So can you hear my dog barking? I hope not. She is like so flipping out right now.
Okay, this is so funny because I just muted Maurice thinking it was his dog.
Exactly. Calm down. Hey, so Dr. Cohen and Dr. Flynn, if folk are listening to this episode before social justice camp has happened, can you tell them how they could be a part of it, and then we'll end there.
Just go to the NIU website and type in social justice camp, and it'll take you to the registration page.
Hey, and you know what?
Yeah,
when we got this episode, we can definitely link that in there.
Yeah.
The camp will be June 6th through 9th.
Awesome.
And we're gonna have an amazing roster of keynote speakers that include Dr. Goldie Muhammad. I know that Dr. Muhammad's presence is just like really high, so she's going to be joining us. Dr. Venus Evans Winters will also be joining us, and Dr. Evans Winters will be talking about the criminalization of Black girls. And we're also, of course, going to have one of our mainstays, and probably now with the sixth Beatle, Dr. J.Q. Adams, emeritus professor from Western Illinois University, who will be talking to us about the intersection of education, social justice, and spirituality. And then there's just a wide array of breakout sessions, and James, Mike, and I, and Dana will also be speaking as well. So yeah, maybe I'll do a session on being an accomplice and navigating critical race theory or something like that. I have no clue what I'm gonna do yet.
Yeah. and y'all need to include some gender stuff too. I know intersectionality encompasses that, but that is something that it's really like I'm seeing it play out a lot. And I think it's because of, just being at the leadership level, seeing how gender and, plays a huge part, even with like negotiating salaries, right? If you're a woman negotiating your salary, you're perceived as aggressive. Whereas men are often encouraged to negotiate their salaries, and they're perceived as, they're really vouching for what they're worth. So it's very interesting to me right now how gender plays into a lot of this, and then add on top of that, right, race and ethnicity.
Yeah, it's complicated.
Very, and I tried to get my, white female counterparts to understand that, yes, we're women, but there's an additional layer, right? And like Mickey Kendall says, I don't necessarily see my dad, who's a Mexican immigrant, or my brothers or my cousins as the threat to me being able to have that upward mobility. They're not the threat, in my opinion. Oftentimes, the people who have, quote unquote, held me back have been white, male, or female individuals. So it's interesting how sometimes feminists want to lump us all together, but our needs are so different.
Seagull hooks.
Hey, you're starting a whole nother episode now.
I know, I can talk about this.
That's why.
Hey, this will be that bonus. This will be that bonus stuff, right? Like if you subscribe, you can see the additional sidebars.
Well, again, thank you both for joining us this morning. We know you signed up for a half hour. Here we are at 11:02. But we appreciate so much your time, your energy, your effort. The work that you're doing in this area is huge. So please know that it is having an impact, because we think about the idea that we both went to this camp, and now we're both at another district continuing that work, where DeKalb is continuing that work, and so as it continues to move out and expand, just know that your impact and influence is continuing to spread, as folk go other places. So again, we appreciate you. For Black, Brown, and Bilingue, I am Maurice McDavid.
And I'm Lisa Jacobson. Muchas gracias for tuning in.
Adios.